What if I told you that a barefoot 80-year-old boy walked up to a millionaire and said he could make his paralyzed daughter walk again? What if I told you this wasn't just another feel-good story, but something that would shake a man's entire world to its core? By the end of this story, you'll question everything you thought you knew about miracles, redemption, and the price of second chances. "I can make her walk again," said a mysterious boy, a barefoot orphan with nothing but a stone and a quiet belief. When a millionaire lost all hope after every expert failed to help his paralyzed daughter, this boy appeared. He wasn't a doctor, wasn't a specialist, but somehow he was the one person who could heal the child. Was he a miracle, or was he about to become the cruelest illusion of all? And here's the twist that'll leave you speechless. The connection between this boy and the millionaire runs deeper than either of them could have imagined. Let me know where you're watching from. And buckle up, because this story is about to take you on a ride you won't forget. On a cool spring evening in the heart of Freedom Plaza, Philadelphia, the square hummed with life. Street musicians strummed their guitars with passion. Children ran between water fountains with pure joy, and the air was thick with the scent of kettle, corn, and hot pretzels. But amid this vibrant scene, one figure sat apart from it all. Richard Blake, a man dressed in an immaculate suit, sat quietly on a weathered bench. His wristwatch sparkled under the fading sun, and his smartphone lay forgotten in his lap. You see, when you're worth millions but your world has crumbled, even the most expensive things lose their meaning. Beside him, in a sleek custom wheelchair, sat his 9-year-old daughter Sarah Blake. She clutched a worn-out stuffed bunny and stared into space with the haunted eyes of a child who had stopped dreaming since the car accident that left her paralyzed. Richard had spared no expense. World-renowned doctors, futuristic therapies, overseas clinics, he'd tried everything. But they'd all told him the same devastating truth: she would never walk again. And when you're a man who's built an empire on making the impossible possible, hearing the word never cuts deeper than any knife. Richard looked at his daughter, a lump forming in his throat. The weight of helplessness pressed down on him like a mountain. "Time to go, kiddo," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the plaza's gentle chaos. Then came a voice that would change everything. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Richard turned, startled, to find a barefoot boy no older than 8 standing before them. Dirt clung to his torn clothes, and his feet were caked in dust. Yet his eyes held a quiet conviction that seemed to pierce straight through Richard's soul. This wasn't just any street kid, there was something different about him. Something that made the air around them feel charged with possibility. The boy's name was Marcus Jameson, though he didn't offer it right away. He didn't beg, didn't offer to sell anything, didn't even extend his hand. He just stood there, unwavering, like he was carrying the weight of absolute certainty on his small shoulders. Richard's first instinct was to wave him off. The anger rose in his chest, like, "Bile, do you know how many professionals have told me that's impossible? And you, a kid off the street, think you know more than them?" His voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd heard every promise, every miracle cure, every desperate hope. "I don't need credentials," Marcus replied, his voice steady as stone. "I just need your permission." That's when something extraordinary happened, Sarah's eyes wide with curiosity, and something else Richard hadn't seen in ages. Pure, unfiltered hope tugged gently at her father's sleeve. "Dad, can we try, please?" Her voice trembled with excitement, not fear. And her grip on his sleeve tightened like she was clinging to possibility itself. Richard froze. He was startled not by the question, but by the look in her eyes. For the first time since the accident, his daughter wasn't looking at the world like it was broken. She was looking at it like it might still hold magic. He looked back at the boy, standing tall despite the dirt and threadbare clothes. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't speak again. He just waited, with the patience of someone who understood that some decisions can't be rushed. Richard's instinct screamed at him to say no, to protect Sarah from more heartbreak, to keep her away from illusions that could shatter what little hope she had left. But then he saw something in her face that made his heart skip. She was fighting again, for The first time in months, his daughter was fighting for something she wanted. He sighed heavily, his voice thick with hesitation, but edged in surrender. 1 hour. That's all you get. 1 hour to try. Under the shade of a jacaranda tree in a quieter corner of the plaza, Marcus set to work. He arranged twigs and pebbles in deliberate circles, spread a frayed cloth on the ground, and handed Sarah a small, smooth black stone. There was a ritual to his movements, a purpose that spoke of knowledge far beyond his years. "What is this?" Richard asked, watching with narrowed eyes, his businessman's mind trying to categorize, to understand, to control. "It's a reminder," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd learned truths the hard way. "She needs to remember walking. Not with her legs yet, but in her mind. The body follows where the spirit leads." Marcus knelt before Sarah, his eyes meeting hers with the kind of understanding that can only come from shared suffering. "Close your eyes. Feel the wind in your hair. Feel the grass beneath your feet. Imagine running. Don't think about what you can't do. Remember what it felt like when you could." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, gathering so quickly they clung to her lashes like tiny crystals. "I feel something," she said slowly, her voice shaky, almost afraid to believe it. Her fingers clenched the smooth stone tighter. "I think I felt my legs, just a little, like a ripple under the surface." She opened her eyes, staring down at her legs with newfound focus, as though trying to will the sensation to return. Her whole body was still, but her spirit surged with something Richard hadn't seen since before the accident. Determination. Richard's breath caught in his throat as he took an unconscious step forward, heart hammering against his ribs. He wanted to speak, to question, to rationalize, but the words wouldn't come. In that moment, there was only Sarah's voice, filled with wonder, and the possibility of a miracle beginning to unfold. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. Something about the boy nagged at him. There was a familiarity in those eyes, a connection he couldn't shake. Before dawn, he made calls, pulled strings, requested a background check on the mysterious child. What he discovered stopped him cold. Marcus Jameson, real name Marcus Arita, had been the lone survivor of a car crash 3 years earlier. The drunk driver, an employee of Blake Logistics. The settlement had been silenced with money. Richard had buried the story to protect his company, to safeguard the empire he had built with calculated decisions and flawless public relations. No one had asked about survivors. No one had mentioned a child. But the child had lived. And he had come back, not for revenge, but for something else entirely. The weight of this revelation crushed down on Richard like a collapsing building. This boy, this miracle worker, was connected to him in the most twisted way possible. His company had destroyed Marcus's family, and now Marcus was trying to heal his daughter. The irony was so cruel it took his breath away. Following a lead, Richard ventured into Kensington, to a shack with a sign that read, "Dr. Harold Amos Free Rehab. No promises, only gratitude." The building looked like it had seen better decades, but there was something honest about its worn-down state, something real that Richard's polished world had forgotten. Dr. Amos, a thin, limping man with silver hair and sharp eyes, greeted him without surprise. "You're Richard Blake," Marcus said. "You'd come." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much suffering and learned to find hope in the smallest places. The retired doctor confirmed Marcus's story, paralyzed, abandoned, healed through unconventional therapy and a will of iron that refused to break. "That boy healed himself," Amos said, handing Richard a tattered notebook filled with sketches and notes. "I just showed him how to believe again. Sometimes that's all a person needs. Someone to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves." Back at the mansion, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He invited Marcus to stay. The housekeeper, Janet Cooper, bristled with concern. "He's not trained, he's not safe, Mr. Blake. What if something goes wrong?" But when Sarah smiled like the sun itself when Marcus arrived, Richard didn't care what anyone said. "He stays," he declared, his voice carrying the finality of a man who'd found his purpose again. A room in the greenhouse was converted into a therapy space, filled with homemade braces, ropes, and weighted cloth balls. Marcus and Sarah began anew. They played, they failed, they tried again. Every small movement became a celebration, every tiny progress a victory against the impossible. There was laughter in that greenhouse, real laughter that echoed through the mansion's halls like music Richard had forgotten existed. But then came the test that would challenge everything. One rainy morning, Sarah couldn't move. Sharp pain struck her back like lightning, and she cried out in agony. Marcus rushed to her side, but Janet immediately called Dr. Crane, who arrived with his medical bag and his absolute certainty. "This ends now," Dr. Crane declared, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I won't stand by and watch this child be put through more suffering because of some misguided experiment." Richard was torn. His daughter was hurting, clearly in physical distress, but there was something in her he hadn't seen in years. Flicker of fight, of life burning bright, even through the pain. She wasn't hopeless anymore. She was battling. Sarah, choking back sobs, clutched his arm and begged, "Don't send him away." Her voice cracked, but her spirit didn't bend. "Please. Dad, he's helping me. I know he is. I can feel it inside me. Something changing, something growing stronger." Richard stared down at her, heart pounding, a war of logic and emotion raging inside him. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was madness, that he was letting his daughter suffer for the sake of false hope. But then he looked at Marcus. The boy stood silent, head slightly bowed, waiting without argument, accepting whatever decision would come. Finally, Richard made a choice that would define them all. His voice was low but firm. 2 more weeks. Show me progress, or it ends." The words carried the weight of ultimatum, but also the whisper of faith. Marcus nodded once, solemn and grateful. Sarah exhaled in relief, gripping the black stone in her palm as though it had just become her anchor in a storm. Dr. Crane and Marcus, natural opposites, formed an unlikely truce. Together, they blended traditional exercises with Marcus's belief-based visualizations. Sarah struggled, but she refused to give up. Every session pushed her to her limits, both physically and emotionally. But she pressed forward, driven by Marcus's quiet encouragement and her own burning desire to reclaim a part of herself. There was something inside her now, something Marcus had awakened that refused to let her surrender. Even when her body faltered, her spirit surged onward, determined to meet the challenge head-on. The pain became her teacher, the struggle her strength. Then it happened. One afternoon, with Richard and the entire household watching, Sarah stood on her own for 3 full seconds. The silence in that room was deafening, broken only by the sound of Richard dropping to his knees, weeping like a man who'd just witnessed the impossible become possible. Dr. Crane said nothing, but slowly removed his glasses, his hands trembling. With disbelief, even science, it seemed, had to bow before the power of unwavering faith. That night, dinner was different. For the first time, Richard invited every servant, every staff member to his table. "My daughter walked today," he announced, his voice thick with emotion, and not because of doctors or expensive treatments. Because of a boy who believed when the rest of us had given up. Later, in his room, Marcus found a legal envelope resting on the edge of his bed. Its seal unbroken, and his name written in careful script across the front. Inside were adoption papers, real official documents bearing Richard Blake's signature and the state seal. It didn't feel real. His eyes scanned the pages again and again, as if trying to convince himself they weren't a dream. He looked up just as Richard entered the room, his expression soft but serious. "You brought my daughter back to life," Richard said, his voice tight with emotion. "You gave her something no one else could: hope, joy, and strength. You reminded me what it means to fight for someone you love. Now, let me give you something in return. A home, a family, a place where you'll never have to survive alone again." Marcus accepted with tears in his eyes, but before he could speak, Sarah rushed to him and hugged him tightly. her arms wrapped around him, not as someone grateful for a helper, but as someone welcoming family. It was the kind of embrace that didn't ask questions, didn't need permission. It simply said, "You belong here." Richard stood by the door, watching them with a fullness in his chest he hadn't felt since the day Sarah was born. For the first time, Richard felt like he had more than wealth. He had purpose, real, profound, and irreversible purpose. And Marcus hadn't come to destroy Richard. He had come to save a part of himself. Because sometimes the miracle isn't walking again, it's believing. You were never broken to begin with. But here's the question that will haunt you long after this story ends. What would you do if the person who saved your child was the one your past nearly destroyed? Do you think Richard ever told Marcus about the connection between them? Was it right of him to adopt the child without revealing the truth? Sometimes the greatest acts of love come wrapped in the most complicated moral dilemmas. Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. And thank you for joining Stories That Breathe for another story that reminds us that miracles aren't just about what we can see, they're about what we choose to believe.